Baiklah, itu dia tadi antara rangkuman tempatan, cerita-cerita di WEF, apa yang menarik termasuklah isu buruh, sawit sebenarnya bilion ringgit kita akan rugi ni Yim kalau tak ada pekerja
Alah,
asing
bukan
masuk.
saja sawit, imagine
Banyak juga
construction sector
construction,
dan sebagainya. In fact, some of the conversation needs to revolve around how to include back some of the low-cost workers back to the economy. Benda tu kita belum sembang lagi. In fact, dalam pembukaan ekonomi ni, belum cerita lagi.
Belum cerita lagi kan.
Bab-bab topik ni.
Tapi sebenarnya dari segi Sing dollar ni risau juga sebenarnya Yim.
Memang.
Teruskan, Yim.
Singapore dollar. Kita mulakan dengan cerita Singapore dollar. The Singapore dollar has continued its rise against the Malaysian currency on Monday, reaching an all-time high against the ringgit. The Singapore dollar reached a record high of 3.1964 ringgit to $1 on Monday, largely due to strengthening in the Sing dollar, before easing to 3.195 ringgit to $1 later in the day. Head of FX analysis at Mon FX, Simon Harvey, says that it is largely due to strength in the Singapore dollar as preferred by the MYR, or Monetary Authority of Singapore. He added there wasn't one individual headline catching event, but instead the technicalities of Singapore's monetary policy that created this all-time high. Sentiment around China also helped in this rise. News that the US President Joe Biden was weighing cutting tariffs on Chinese goods helped lift the yuan to its highest levels since May 5th. The Singapore dollar has been rising against the Malaysian ringgit since late April, and money changers now see a surge of people lining up to buy the ringgit in the week of April 25th after the exchange rate rose to 3.17, up from 3.10 levels in early April. Experts spoke to different points that was preferred by the monetary policies by Singapore and Malaysia central banks in explaining why the Singapore dollar has been rising against the Malaysian ringgit. Singapore has pursued a more aggressive monetary policy by appreciating the Singapore dollar at a faster pace and at a higher level. The authorities first tightened its policy in October last year when it raised the slope of its exchange rate-based policy band to allow the Singapore dollar to appreciate at a slightly faster pace. This then followed up by another steepening of the slope in January, surprising markets with an inter-meeting adjustment. Here to unpack this is Dr. Hezri Adnan, the Executive Director at MYR, or the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. Dr. Hezri, let's do a quick review of what you think is happening when it comes to the Malaysia ringgit versus Singapore dollar gap that is widening ever so large nowadays.
Thank you, Saudara Ibrahim, for inviting MYR to this conversation this morning. I tend to agree with what the news you quoted just now saying, that it's predominantly because of the stronger or more aggressive policies pursued by Singapore, particularly since the inflation rate or the headline inflation in Singapore is at about 7-year high, the highest in 7 years. So they have been increasing the sort of exchange rate since last year, since the third time, and it has little to do with our sort of currency characteristic.
Dr. Hezri, if I can just pull up on the screen right now the graph of the Malaysian ringgit weakening against the Singapore dollar, and if we can put this graph right on the screen right now, we can see the timeline of how it has progressed over the past few weeks. April has been on a decline, but there is a steeper decline following this moving forward. Do you think that somehow or rather there has to be issues of the interest rate conversation, opening of economy? What would be precipitating this rate of decline?
Well, the Singapore dollar has been strengthening against major currencies, including US dollars, and because of this aggressive stance of the Central Bank of Singapore, MAS. Of course, we will see a little bit of a period of volatility in the forthcoming weeks, and of course, we all know that the Bank Negara Malaysia has also increased our lending rate, or the OPR, a couple of weeks back. So I think there is a possibility of catching up by the end of the year, but there are so many variables that we have to look at.
Dr. Hezri, it's not just about the Singapore dollar, it's also about Malaysian ringgit versus other currencies, including that of the US dollar. You see, I'm not trying to be nostalgic, but being a Johorian, I used to go to Singapore every week when I was a boy, and the exchange rate was actually quite handsome at that time, 1 to 1, 1.2 to 1, something like that. Do you think that this is going to ever, reach that level again, or are we stuck in this position where we are continuing to be depreciated against major currencies, including that of our lovely neighbors down south?
It's very unlikely that we'll return to the heydays of one-to-one, exchange. But of course, there are some positive impacts that can ensue from this change. There are about more than 300,000 people working in Singapore, so the remittance will be greater on part of the families, of course. But that also, begs the question whether there will be more talent drain to Singapore moving forward. That's another impact that we should be worried about.
Okay, Dr. Hezri, the larger conversation that I want to touch on is on trade. Malaysia and Singapore do trade extensively with one another. They continuously to be in the top 3 trading partners. Of course, Malaysia is exporting a lot to Singapore as well. Do you think that trade is going to be affected? Will we see corporates, all big and small, going to be impacted by currency gains or currency losses that might be too pronounced for us to mention at this stage?
Yeah, as we know, the general rule of thumb is that if the currency is low, then it's good for exports. And in some sectors where we export to Singapore, electronics, for instance, I think that's pretty good for the sector. But there are other, challenges or sectors that will be affected. But of course, I think we have seen this for many years, and somehow I think what we are seeing happening in Singapore is mainly because of the the need to address the growing inflation there. And also we know that in Singapore there's going to be a sort of fiscal adjustment next year with their tax going to be increased. So I think the authority in Singapore is looking at a bigger picture. And of course, their move to strengthen the Sing dollar has come at a certain price as well.
Dr. Hezri, there is also that conversation of how the monetary policy of Singapore is going to move forward on this. Putting our hats on as observers of the Singapore currency, do you feel that the Sing dollar needs to be depreciated slightly and some measures are to be expected by the MYR anytime soon?
According to some pundits, I think we're likely to see a greater adjustment later, because again, coming back to the inflation question. So we will be able to catch up if we increase our OPR in the next next quarter or so. So I think we need not be too worried about this because this is a global phenomenon that we are seeing. The most important thing is our efforts, our government's efforts in controlling inflation. I think with the OPR increase, we'll see a bit of adjustment moving forward. And our fundamentals are strong. Our growth recorded about 5% in the first quarter. Unemployment rate is pretty, it's also improved. And also the inflation, or headline inflation, is only expected to be about 2.2 to 3.2, much lower than the rest of the world. But of course, we have some romanticism related to Singapore, our relationship with Singapore. For most Malaysians, perhaps the June sale is not going to be a good thing anymore with this increase of exchange rate.